What is the most hilarious historical fact you know? Notorious pirate hunter Benjamin Hornigold once attacked a ship just to steal all of the crew members' hats. His men had gotten drunk and lost their hats during a party the night before and decided to board a ship to get replacements. One day Alexander the Great asked the philosopher Diogenes why he was sifting through the garbage. Diogenes responded, "I am looking for the bones of your father, but I cannot distinguish them from the bones of his slaves." Also, Alexander the Great asked Diogenes if there was something he could do for him. Diogenes replied, "Yes. Get out of my son. Plato wants to find humans as featherless bipeds." Diogenes brought a Phaetheral's chicken into Plato's classroom, saying, "Behold, I've brought you a man." In 1847, Robert Liston performed an amputation in 25 seconds, operating so quickly that he accidentally amputated his assistant's fingers as well. Both patient and assistant later died of sepsis, and a spectator reportedly died of shock, resulting in the only known surgical procedure with a 300% mortality rate. In 1866, Liechtenstein sent out an army of 80 men to participate in the Austro-Prussian War. They came back with 81 men, suffering no casualties and having made one friend along the way. I love the quest for Jesus's foreskin. See, Christianity is unusual among the world's religions in that there is no earthly remnant of its most important figure left. Dude done went up to heaven. You see, but back in the Middle Ages some clever bastard realized that, since Jesus was Jewish, he would have been circumcised and therefore Jesus's foreskin was still out there in the world somewhere. Thus began a years-long quest to find Jesus's foreskin, which ended with several brave knights returning to the Vatican with numerous specimens, all of which were closely examined until one was declared authentic. One can only imagine how that investigation went. Jesus's foreskin became an object of worship after that, although, unfortunately, it has long since been lost, meaning that another quest to find the foreskin that everyone thought was Jesus's foreskin needs to be undertaken by someone. You're welcome, Naughty Dog, for giving you the plot for the next Uncharted game. Edit, my stupid spelling. Julius Caesar was once kidnapped by pirates, and when he found out how much they were ransoming him for, he was offended at how low the amount was and told them to raise it. Meanwhile, he spent his captivity annoying the it out of his captors, holding poetry readings and generally being a pompous D.O. And he also joked that he'd eventually hunt them all down and crucify them. The ransom was paid. Caesar was released. Then he hunted them down and crucified them. Daniel Stibelt, a top pianist in his own right, challenged his contemporary Beethoven to a musical improv duel. Stibelt did believe he had a shot. He was no kid, and had already composed for Marie Antoinette and operatized a successful version of Romeo and Juliet. He showed up to the improv and played one of his own works, for which he'd brought the sheet music. Once it was his turn, Beethoven turned the sheet music upside down and beautifully ducked the piece sideways and backwards, overturing Stibelt style, all the while like a cat teasing a particularly boring mouse. No one ever challenged Beethoven to a musical improv again, least of all Stibelt, who never again set foot in Vienna. From the memoirs of a Bill Bellamy, a British World War II tank troop commander, one of our favorite pursuits was to eavesdrop on other squadron wireless nets while we were resting. This could be very exciting and, on occasion, very amusing. One splendid moment occurred when C Squadron were out on a standing patrol and Michael Payne, a young and popular troop leader, was in a hedgerow with shelling taking place to his front. Apparently the whole area was covered with cattle, who paid little attention to the lethal objects dropping around them and concentrated on the job in hand. Suddenly over the air came the laconic voice of Mickey, "Gunner, you see that poor cow in front which has just been wounded? Put the poor devil out of its misery, will you?" He obviously imagined he was talking on his intercom and not broadcasting to the world, because he then remained on the air with his microphone switch pressed. There was a moment of silence and then a rat-tat-tat of the Bisa machine gun. Then came Mickey's agonized cry, "Not that one, you bloody fool. The one on the left." We didn't let him forget that for a long time. Pythagoras, the man who made one of the most iconic mathematic discoveries in history, had a phobia of beans. There was a Japanese soldier named Hiro Onoda who never realized World War II was over until 1974. He was sent to a small island in the Philippines to spy on the American forces. He evaded capture and remained in the jungle to carry out his mission for the next 30 years. His former superior had to come out of retirement to convince him the war was over. In the northeast of England, there are names for people from various places. Geordie for people from Newcastle and Mackham for people from Sunderland may be the most famous. Similar with Cockney for parts of London. The place I was born, in the NE, also has a name for its people, monkey hangers, or hinger, in dialect. Apparently, during the Napoleonic Wars a French ship was wrecked just off the coast of Hartlepool and a little monkey that had been dressed in a little monkey French uniform for unbowed lols washed up on shore. Hartlepool, being a little coastal town, wasn't super full of intelligent people, and some of the locals decided to try the monkey on the beach. They asked it all sorts of questions, but because it was a monkey it A, didn't have a ducking clue what was going on, and B, obviously couldn't speak, let alone speak English, as the Hartlepoolians had never seen a French person or a monkey before. The obvious conclusion was that this monkey in his little uniform was a French spy, and they hanged it. Solid work, guys. Personal favorite, studied ancient history at university. Why yes, I do never use that in my career. The Battle of Drepana. Romans attempting to take out the Carthaginian naval forces at Brocasiga. Weird Roman naval fact, they kept sacred chickens to determine when the gods favored them. You throw the chickens some grain, and if they eat, you should attack. Important to note, the chickens are only fed when you need to decide whether to attack. Normally chickens forage between battles, but these ones are on boats most of the time. Romans are super pragmatic about fighting. They are completely aware that semi-starving the chickens will mean they should always eat when you want to attack. Anyway, the commander at Drepana decides to attack, so they bring out the chickens and toss them some grain. The chickens ignore the grain, they don't even touch it. This is not a good omen. His sailors start to get freaked out, but he's determined to attack, so he tosses the chickens overboard and says let them drink if they don't want to eat. Does not go down well with his forces, but Romans are disciplined, so they do as commanded. Romans get thoroughly trashed by the Carthaginians. TLDR, if starving chickens don't eat your grain, don't fight naval battles against Carthage. A lesson we can all apply today, for sure. Edit. Mobile typing while eating Subway, not a recipe for accuracy. After her 9th child, Queen Victoria's doctor advised her not to have any more. She responded with, "Oh Sir James, doctor, am I not to have any more fun in bed?" I loved reading about her. She was very much in love with her husband, and when he died she kept the last glass he drank out of in the same place on the nightstand for the remainder of her life, like 40ish years or so. The founding fathers wouldn't let Benjamin Franklin work on the Declaration of Independence because they were afraid he would slip a joke into it. Don't know why, but I found the fact that Stalin photoshopped people he didn't like out of photos hilarious. King Henry VIII of England created his own church just to divorce, technically, get his marriage annulled, his wife. While there are very good historical reasons for why he did this, as a modern person, I find this fact hilarious. Napoleon was attacked by a horde of bunnies while hunting. The Pentagon wasn't built that way for any defense reason. In fact, it's not even a regular pentagon. It was designed to fit nicely into the empty field between 5 major roads. But then later there was some reason why they had to build it somewhere else. I think it was too close to some city or something. Anyway, they'd already paid someone to design this 5-sided building, so they just said duck it. It's a pentagon now. George Washington would bow when greeting others because he didn't like physical contact. Would be much funnier today. At some point, evolution decided, what about a venomous duck beaver? Gaius Valerius Catullus was a bisexual Roman poet who was down with op and wrote some kinky erotic poetry after being mocked by Marcus Furius Babaculus, a poet who had an affair with Catullus' boyfriend, and Marcus Aurelius Cotta Maximus Miscellanus, a senator. He decided to create the most epic diss track, which I will reproduce for you here today in modern English. Pedicabo ego vos amabo, I will ass duck and throat buck you. I will ass duck and throat buck you. Aurelius the bottom, and Furious the shooter. You think that because my poems are kinda sexy, I'm a pervert. Only a poet has to be clean. He must be moral, not his poems. To be honest, my poems are witty, they're charming, and only because they're sexy and spicy, and can arouse boners, not in horny teenagers, but in impotent old men, who can't get their D's up. But because I write about millions of kisses, you think I'm some sort of cuck? Duck you in the ass and in the mouth. 1,000 people died when the Austrian army attacked itself over a few barrels of schnapps. More than the army of Austria, approximately 100,000 strong, was setting up camp around the town of Carinsebeș, now Carinsebeș, in modern Romania. The army's vanguard, a contingent of hussars, crossed the Timeo River nearby to scout for the presence of the Ottoman Turks. There was no sign of the Ottoman army, but the hussars did run into a group of Tsigani, who offered to sell schnapps to the war-weary soldiers. The cavalrymen bought the schnapps and started to drink. More than soon afterwards, some infantry crossed the river. When they saw the party going on, the infantry demanded alcohol for themselves. The hussars refused to give them any of the schnapps, and while still drunk, they set up makeshift fortifications around the barrels. A heated argument ensued, and one soldier fired a shot. More than immediately, the hussars and infantry engaged in combat with one another. During the conflict, some infantry began shouting Tursi, Tursi, Turks, Turks. The hussars fled the scene, thinking that the Ottoman army's attack was imminent. Most of the infantry also ran away. The army comprised Italians from Lombardy, Serbs, Croats, and Austrians, plus other minorities, many of whom could not understand each other. While it is not clear which one of these groups did so, they gave the false warning without telling the others, who promptly fled. The situation was made worse when officers, in an attempt to restore order, shouted halt, halt, which was misheard by soldiers with no knowledge of German as Allah, Allah. Fidel Castro really likes to drink and eat dairy products, so he made a gained ice cream shop and it's still functional. He mixed two breed of cows to create a super cow that withstand up to heat and give out lots of milk, and her name is Uba Blanca. During the First Crusade, in the siege of Jerusalem, the Christians were using a battering ram to crack through a wall when the Muslims started dropping firebombs on it. The Christians started putting the fire out, but it was already badly damaged. Realizing that the fire had made it impossible to move, the Christians decided to burn it completely to clear a path forward. So they started lighting it on fire. When the Muslims saw this, they started pouring water down on it to put the fire out and save the battering ram. Maybe not hilarious, but where else am I going to get the chance to share this mildly amusing story? In 1942, two Gestapos caught a Polish resistance member, Józef Mierzyński. Instead of turning him in, they decided to milk the situation and have him lead them to the resistance's weapons stash so the two Gestapos could claim a greater catch and possibly get a promotion. He led them to a secluded house in Zgierz with attic storage accessible only via folded ladder. The attic turned out to be full of stolen Wehrmacht guns. In fact, there were so many crates of guns and ammo there that the Gestapos grew tired of taking turns hauling it out, and forced Joe on gunpoint to get up there and drag the boxes out himself. As could be expected, he promptly gunned them down through the ceiling. But hey, there's more. The noise attracted the attention of the Nazi-controlled police and German troops, and Mierzyński had to escape. So he did the most logical thing. Instead of running away, stealing a car, or something, he slowly packed as much guns as he could into a biggest bag, walked nonchalantly to the intersection, and hopped on a tram, the slowest possible means of escape. Sat there and started reading a newspaper until he reached Lodz. The fact that Hitler suffered from the most horrendous gas complaints, his extreme diet, recurring stomach problems, likely psychosomatic, and reliance on quack drug pushers like Morel made life at his dinner table terrible for his guests. Speer writes about it in Inside the Third Reich. Guess that's why he hid a dog? Union General John Sedgwick in the American Civil War was killed in action at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse during an engagement with Confederate sharpshooters. Among his last words, "They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." During the 1916 Easter Rising in Ireland, the start of Ireland declaring independence, Fighting between the Irish and English stopped in one park so someone could come feed the ducks swans. William Henry Harrison, 9th US President, only held office for a month because he died from pneumonia caught during his inauguration speech. It was raining and refused a coat because he a man. And it also didn't help that he has the longest inauguration speech of any US president. Roman Emperor Caracalla was assassinated whilst eating diarrhea. His bodyguards killed him while his hands were occupied. President Lyndon Johnson liked showing journalists his D, whether they wanted to or not, and also talking about how big it was. Molasses flooded Boston on an unseasonably hot January day in 1919. For decades after, you could allegedly still smell the molasses during the summer. Unfortunately, 21 people died and 150 people were injured as a result of the flood, which makes it more absurd, in a rather morbid way. The Roman Emperor Valerian, after being captured at the Battle of Edessa, was forced to be Chaperon's footstool for when the Persian emperor wanted to mount his horse. Valerian stayed in captivity all his life and was eventually killed when Chaper decided to pour molten gold on his head before flaying and stuffing him as a trophy. Not necessarily hilarious but interesting. The men in George Washington era wore those white wigs because syphilis was running rampant, and it caused patchy baldness. Wigs were expensive though, and it soon became a status symbol and a sign of wealth to wear one. The wigs were also fashioned in the way the military men of the time wore their hair, akin to today's crew kit, so it was also seen as the cool style. George Washington's actually wasn't a wig, it was his own hair, which was reddish, rolled and turned under and covered with white powder. Henry VI's body exploded in his coffin and he was eaten by dogs. Joseph Stalin sent assassins to kill Josip Broz Tito. After the 5th, Tito wrote to Stalin, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them. One with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow and I won't have to send a second." Emperor Constantine of Byzantium, having thoroughly infuriated the populace of Constantinople over his mishandling of various matters concerning the church and fearing for his life, moved his court to Syracuse in Sicily in 663, and proceeded to spend the next few years fighting the Lombards in Italy and stripping former Roman provinces of wealth to fund his court. In 668, after rumors that he'd have the capital of the empire set permanently to Syracuse, one of his attendants murdered him in a fit of nostalgia while Constans was taking a bath. The weapon of choice, a soap dish. The first thing said to the pilgrims by Native Americans, specifically by Samoset, "Do you have any beer?" in perfect English. By the time the pilgrims arrived at Plymouth, European trade routes to North America already existed for generations. Trade diplomats and fishermen traveled extensively to and from Europe. Edit. Thanks to Youth Fantasy for the correction. Before CPR was thought of, a common form of resuscitation was to insert a finger into the unconscious person's anus. The Pope Saint Leo once convinced Attila the Hun to just turn around and leave, and no one knows how he did it. Then, years later, he encountered a dude called Gaiseric just south of Rome. Convinced him to turn around and leave. No one knows how. At the Palace of Versailles, there were no restrooms. People would just crap in the corners. It would be cleared out every few days. The giant tortoises taken from the Galapagos Islands never reached their destination because the crew ate them. During the Sino-Japanese War of 1894, the Chinese Navy was supplied with cocoa powder instead of gunpowder because cacao is cheaper. Ulysses S. Grant, Union General and later President of the United States, was given a ticket for speeding on his horse. President Taft apparently got stuck in the White House bathtub. Warren G. Harding gambled away a set of White House china. While waging a war with both the British and Americans, Hitler and his loyal generals unilaterally broke their peace alliance treaty with the Soviet Union and attacked them. Like, they were fighting 2 big world powers, and they somehow decided that wasn't enough and that they should also fight what was biggest nation on earth, which was geographically located in the opposite side of their war front with the US and Britain. So they would need to move part of their forces to the other side of the country, and they thought it was a good idea. After Leonardo da Vinci died, ownership of the Mona Lisa went to King Francis I of France, who hung her in his bathing room. In the 1982 version of Annie, there's a bit where Daddy Warbucks is deciding whether he wants to keep the Mona Lisa and says, "There's something interesting in that woman's smile. I might learn to like her. Hang her in my bathroom." The first time I saw that movie after learning this fact, I laughed my head off when I heard this line. FDR entered a room unannounced during a visit by Churchill. Churchill happened to be naked. I think he had just stepped out of the bath. And Churchill, being Churchill, said the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. At the 1901 World's Fair in Buffalo, President McKinley was shot, and before he died, a team was organized to get Dr. Roswell Park, a famous area surgeon, to downtown Buffalo from nearby Niagara Falls to operate on the dying president. The team got to Niagara Falls, where Dr. Park was in the middle of a critical surgery. They said something along the lines of, "Dr. Park, your services are needed immediately in Buffalo," to which Dr. Park replied, "I cannot leave in the middle of performing this surgery, even if President McKinley was dying." I can only imagine the someone from the Get Dr. Park to Buffalo team saying, "Hey buddy, you should actually take a seat. We need to talk about exactly that." In 2016, the American political system elected billionaire Donald J. Trump to the position of POTUS with the expectation that he would help the impoverished of Caucasian descent. 1916 to 1920-ish. The British Army were looking for Michael Collins to arrest him as he was part of Díl Éireann, an Irish state government which the British did not recognise as they did not grant Ireland independence. Collins was the head of intelligence and was in charge of IRA hit squads, so he was a priority for the British to find and arrest. You'd think the man would go into hiding somewhere, right? Nope, he rode around Dublin City on a bicycle in plain view because the British Army had no idea what he looked like. This isn't really fact, more like a conspiracy theory. Officially, the philosopher and registered sign Descartes died of pneumonia while at the court of Queen Christina of Sweden, whom he was teaching. Unofficially, he was murdered because some courtiers feared he would convert the Protestant queen to Catholicism, which would likely lead to the eruption of war. Jokes on the murderers, if he was indeed murdered, because Queen Christina did in fact convert to Catholicism. She then abdicated her throne and moved to Italy to live with her lesbian lovers. If you like dark humor in the form of stupid ether, Louis de Bourbon-Soissons, second cousin of Louis XI, led a battle against the royal army. With the support of Spain, the guy pissed off the French crown by plotting to kidnap or assassinate Le Cardinal de Richelieu. Leading the battle, Louis de Bourbon-Soissons was about to crush the French army and win the battle. Seeing that the battle was almost won, he lifted up the visor of his helmet with his pistolus and inadvertently shot himself in the headus. Yup. The whole Emu War thingy. During the siege of Acre, Philip II of France had two massive trebuchets, God's own stoner thrower, Sling, and Bad Neighbor. After Napoleon Bonaparte's death, his priest confessor, Vignali, allegedly cut off Napoleon's D. This was later sold as part of a collection and ended up in the possession of Dr. Abraham Rosenbach. Rosenbach took Napoleon's D on tour. It was displayed on a small velvet cushion in New York's Museum of French Art. Apparently it's now owned by the Latimer family in New York. Does anybody else remember when that Greek or Roman general declared war on the ocean? Illuska law says that you can't look at a moose from an airplane. Valerius Maximus wrote about Aeschylus' death. Basically, the dramatist Aeschylus heard of a prophecy that he would meet his demise by a falling object. Because of this, he went outside of the city in order to avoid his death. Little did he know that an eagle with a turtle flew over and dropped the turtle on his shiny bald head, mistaking his head for a rock. One of the three greatest racehorses who ever lived and one of the three foundation sires of thoroughbreds as we know them today was named Potuinu or Potatoes because the stable hand got to name him and he didn't know how to spell potato. Mozart had a pretty immature sense of humor. He would write dirty letters to his sister for fun, and even write dirty songs. He wrote a song called Lek mich I Marsh, which translates to lick me in the ass. This entire post is entirely underrated. Haven't laughed that hard in months. Lyndon B. Johnson named his D Jumbo and would pretty much whip it out for reporters all the time. A Chinese strategist was undercover in the enemy ranks. Suggested to the general he tie the ships to each other because it would be windy. His actual army then set a ship on fire and, well, won.